Hi guys, welcome back to the Med Student Notes. We have spoken in the previous videos about hypersensitivity type 1 and type 2. Let's go ahead and discuss type 3 today. We'll do it in a structured way where we answer some questions. So let's see what the gist of type 3 hypersensitivity is. Basically, antigen antibody complexes form within the circulation. They deposit in the blood vessels, and this leads to complement activation and acute inflammation. Antigen antibody complexes forming within the body is kind of a natural process. There's a lot of physiological processes and metabolism and building going on in the body, and there's usually small amounts of nucleoproteins circulating. Nucleoproteins are your DNA or RNA bound to proteins, and antibodies can form to these, and these complexes do arise within the body, but they're cleared away. The spleen and macrophages clear these away normally. When does it get pathological? If they deposit in large amounts, and if these deposits persist, then it becomes the pathological process of hypersensitivity type 3. Where does this happen? Normally, these complexes, I'm going to use this to indicate an immune complex. So, normally, these complexes form within the circulation itself. Or another possibility is there's already an antigen planted somewhere in the body. The antibody goes and attaches to it within the tissue, and the immune complex forms right there within the tissue. So, those are the two possibilities. Now, hypersensitivity type 3, we can discuss it as a systemic response and also its local manifestation. Let's first talk about the systemic manifestation. Now, something called acute serum sickness can be discussed as a prototype of hypersensitivity type 3. Basically, back then, the way we used to passively immunize people sometimes was by using serum from other animals who were already immunized to other diseases. Like, for example, a horse that is immunized to diphtheria. So, its serum would contain the diphtheria antibody, and that would be given to humans, right? And this is a foreign protein. This is a completely foreign protein that you're giving to humans. And that is going to give rise to a reaction, right? So, these days, this is not something that we do. It's very rare. It happens when we give antivenom when a person has a snake bite. These usually contain antibodies that way. But it's quite rare. So basically, the first stage is the formation of the antigen antibody complex. How does that happen? So, if we talk about this, it happens when this foreign protein is given. But when we're talking at a larger scale, it could probably be because a pathogen entered the body, maybe a virus, a bacteria. An antibody that is specific to this antigen forms. They both combine and give rise to an immune complex. In this case, also, if it's a large complex with a lot of antibodies, with antibody excess rather than antigen excess, these are easily recognized. You see something huge, the spleen, the macrophages, they're going to spot these and destroy them. But if they are smaller, if the immune complexes are much smaller and they have an excess of antigens, these tend to evade the defenses of the spleen and macrophages, and these then persist in the circulation. So, when and where and how does the deposition happen? When, like we discussed, when antigens are in excess and when the immune complex is small or intermediate in size. Where? This can happen within the blood vessels, and some organs prone to this are the kidneys and joints. Why is that? So, both of these are environments with high hemodynamic pressures. In the kidneys, you have your glomerulus, which is filtering out and making urine. In your joints, you have the synovium, which is filtering your blood and creating the synovial fluid. So when you have such high pressures and your blood is going in, there's a lot of small vessels in these environments, and these immune complexes can easily get stuck and entrapped there. Also, when there is an increase in vascular permeability. When there is an increase in vascular permeability, there is space for more inflammatory cells to come in and worsen local damage. What causes vascular permeability to increase? Interestingly, immune complexes themselves can increase vascular permeability because it's going to trigger leukocytes and mast cells and other inflammatory cells and activate complement, and all these would lead to an increase in vascular permeability. So the next thing that happens is inflammation. So the way the immune complex does that is, firstly, as we discussed, it activates complement. And as the complement is activated, the cascade reaction happens. Your C3A and C5A, which are anaphylatoxins, are produced. And these anaphylatoxins act as chemotactic agents and activate more inflammatory cells. Another way is immune complexes bind the Fc end of macrophages and neutrophils. So when they bind to neutrophils and macrophages, these also call to more inflammatory cells. So it's like, one of them is triggered, they start calling all the other inflammatory cells, the other inflammatory cells are triggered, they call to even more. So it's just a crowd of all your inflammatory cells and cytokines rushing in. Another thing immune complexes do is cause platelet aggregation. They activate what is called the Hageman factor. To put it simply, causes the formation of microthrombi, small clots within the body. So these small clots are going to go launch in tiny vessels in the body, right? And they're going to block them. And this will cause local ischemia, and then eventually tissue injury. Now, depending on the tissue, if the injury to the tissue here is blood vessels, we'll call that vasculitis. If it's the joints, we'll call that arthritis. So you're going to get all these symptoms of hypersensitivity type 3, including fever, arthralgia, urticaria. Your lymph nodes can get involved. Another interesting thing that happens here is, now that we have this immune complex, right, it's deposited somewhere, your neutrophils and your macrophages are going to try and destroy this. But this is planted and it is persisting in the tissue. So these are not exactly able to dislodge this immune complex from its place. So these cells are going to get quite frustrated. They're going to be secreting a ton of stuff. They're going to be secreting prostaglandins. They're going to be secreting lysosomal enzymes that will basically dissolve and digest the basement membrane. And then you've got reactive oxygen species. So you've got all these things that are locally damaging the tissues. You have the cells of our own body, the macrophages, the neutrophils. They're trying to attack this immune complex, which is causing all this stuff, right, in the first place. But they're not exactly able to remove this, right? So they're secreting more and more damaging substances, which is causing damage to the rest of the body rather than actually pulling this out. It's a frustrating but interesting process where your body is being induced to attack itself, which is again the whole point of autoimmune conditions and hypersensitivity, right? Anyway, moving on. When hypersensitivity type 3 occurs from a single exposure, like if you remember post streptococcal glomerulonephritis, you have a streptococcal infection that induces antibodies, and the antibodies, along with the streptococcal antigens, form immune complexes which get deposited in the kidneys, and that inflammation triggers nephritic syndrome. So, your nephritic syndrome from PSGN is one of the manifestations of hypersensitivity type 3. Now, in single exposure, once this happens, okay, your immune complexes are formed, the kidneys take some damage, but the rest of the immune system is functioning and they eventually clear it out. So, eventually, it gets better. in most cases. But when there is chronic exposure, like for example, you have nucleic acids in your body, right? What if your body is attacking these nucleic acids themselves? You're making antibodies to substances that are already in your body, and these keep forming antigen antibody complexes, right? And they keep depositing and they keep causing these reactions. So, this is chronic exposure. I hope you understood what I'm talking about. I'm talking about systemic lupus erythematosus, I'm talking about SLE. And this is another way hypersensitivity type 3 can manifest. So, we have spoken about what happens when it affects the body at a systemic level, right? All of it, like it's going to different organs, kidneys, and joints, and in SLE, it's so many things. But when we talk about a local manifestation, a local way that hypersensitivity type 3 can take place, this is called the Arthus reaction. Again, this is also something that is pretty rare nowadays. Basically, you have somebody that's already immunized to a disease. So, this person already has antibodies. Now, I am giving him an injection where I am sending in an antigen trying to immunize this person, right? So, how do vaccinations work? You give them a more subdued version of an antigen to help them have an immune response so that they have antibodies in their body. Now, this person already has antibodies, right? But I'm also giving an antigen, not knowing that. So, right here, you're going to have antigens. You're going to have a bunch of antibodies that are already there and that are forming. So there's a concentration here of immune complexes. So you will see a local reaction right in that place. What would you see? You would see edema, you would see pretty bad hemorrhage, and you could also see ulceration. This is also something the body usually resolves by itself unless it gets very severe, in which case you would give antihistamines and steroids. So, now on the whole, when we talk about hypersensitivity reactions, you see how we treat them with steroids, right? Or antihistamines. Why do we do that? Steroids essentially control the immune reaction of the body, right? And hypersensitivity is basically that your body just reacting wildly and violently to something that perhaps it doesn't need to react that way. So, when we give steroids, this kind of tells the immune system to calm down. So that should make a lot of sense to you now. Before we go, another example for hypersensitivity type 3 would be something like polyarthritis nodosa. This is also a vasculitis, right? It is theorized that a hepatitis B infection can cause this. Antigens of hepatitis B are in the body, so antibodies form to that. That forms an immune complex. These immune complexes go cause local ischemia, local tissue damage, causing polyarthritis nodosa, vasculitis. So that was hypersensitivity type 3. I feel like I covered this pretty quickly this time. If it felt like I was too fast or I didn't explain in a structured enough way, please let me know. If it did help you, please also let me know. It was great talking to you again. I hope to see you in the next video where we will discuss hypersensitivity type 4, and it will be an end to our hypersensitivity series, which I hope you learned a lot from. Bye bye.